Welcome back to True Echo, where real emotion meets unforgettable drama. Today's story is about music, memory, and a girl who shattered centuries of silence with 10 trembling fingers. When a world-renowned maestro mocked a humble teen pianist on stage, no one expected her to fight back, with a forbidden melody he once wrote in prison. What happened next stunned a nation, and exposed a scandal the elite thought they'd buried forever. Stay tuned. You call that music? The words echoed through the auditorium like the clang of a dropped baton, slicing through the stillness. All eyes were on the towering man at the judges' table, Maestro Voss. Revered conductor. Composer. Unquestioned authority. His silver hair glinted under the lights, his expression hard and unreadable. Seated alone at the grand piano, 17-year-old Lila Monroe froze. Her fingers hovered just above the keys. The air felt too thick to breathe. The entire audience, hundreds of faces, watched with wide-eyed fascination, waiting for her to fall apart. It sounds like a fairy tale fantasy someone scribbled in a dream, Voss continued. This is a national stage, not a bedtime recital. A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone chuckled near the back. The judges looked uncomfortable, avoiding her eyes. No one intervened. No one defended her. Lila swallowed, voice barely audible. I found it in a second-hand bookshop. It had no name, just music. It moved me. And so you chose to play anonymous scribble at one of the most prestigious youth competitions in the country? Voss's voice was laced with disdain. Do you take us for fools? Silence. Lila's hands trembled. The spotlight felt hotter now, and her heart thundered so loudly she thought the microphone might pick it up. All the sacrifices, missing lunch to buy sheet music, late nights in her school's creaky practice room, fingers blistered from repetition, had brought her here. For this. Her throat tightened. But she didn't leave. Instead, she closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and lowered her hands to the keys. The first note was barely audible. A whisper. But it lingered, strange and sorrowful, filled with longing. The laughter stopped. Even Voss blinked, his arms still crossed. Lila played on. She didn't play to win. She played because the music demanded it. Because the piece had lived inside her since she first opened that battered book weeks ago, tucked behind a dusty copy of Chopin's Nocturnes. The composition unfolded with aching elegance, arpeggios fluttering like wings over shattered glass. Her left hand moved like a tide, steady and mournful. Her right, like a voice long silenced. She could feel the pain written into the very chords, as if someone had bled through every measure. And somehow, she knew this wasn't just music. It was memory. She lost herself in the piece, forgetting the stage, the judges, even Voss. All that existed was the echo of someone else's sorrow. When the final note rang out, soft and suspended, no one clapped. Not because it wasn't worthy, but because no one dared disturb what they had just witnessed. Even the air felt reverent. Then came the applause, like a wave breaking the silence. First one. Then many. Some rose to their feet. Some wiped away tears. But Voss didn't clap. He stared at the floor, hands clenched, mouth a flat line. Then he stood. The scrape of his chair echoed loud. Without a word, he walked off the stage, vanishing behind the side curtain. Lila stood frozen. What had she done? The music director approached her as she stepped off stage. Wait, the woman said, breathless. What did you call the piece again? I didn't, Lila replied, confused. There's no title. The director looked pale. And where did you find it? Lila repeated, in a bookstore. Near the train station. The director stared at her like she had just stepped out of a ghost story. That's not possible, she whispered. What's not? That piece, she paused, glanced around, then said, I think you just played something Maestro Voss wrote. Something from the years he disappeared. Something no one was ever supposed to hear. Lila's heart skipped. What? The woman grabbed her arm gently. Come with me. There's something you need to know. And just like that, Lila's performance wasn't just about a girl on a stage anymore. It was the spark that reignited a past someone had tried desperately to bury. The hallway behind the auditorium felt colder than Lila remembered. As she followed the music director, whose name she now knew was Elise Marlowe, her mind spun. The stage felt like a distant memory, the applause barely a whisper in her ears. All she could think about was what Elise had said. Something Voss wrote. Something no one was supposed to hear. They stopped at a narrow door marked, "Adjudicators Only." Elise glanced around, then unlocked it with a key from her lanyard. Inside was a small lounge, soft lamp lighting, a half-eaten cheese tray, scattered folders on a long oak table. A black coat hung on a rack in the corner. The air smelled faintly of waxed wood and perfume. Elise motioned for her to sit. "I was his student once," she said softly. "Carl Voss. Back when I was 20. He was already a legend by then, sharp and untouchable. But he taught me things I still carry with me today." She paused, lowering her voice. Then, something happened. He vanished for 5 years. No tours, no lectures, no recordings. Nothing. "I've never heard anything about that," Lila said, unsure whether to be surprised or suspicious. "You wouldn't. No one talks about it. Not publicly. And those of us who knew better were warned not to." Lila sat forward. "Warned by who?" Elise hesitated, then pulled her bun loose, running a hand through her hair. "It's complicated. Look, those years, he was institutionalized. That's the official line. Exhaustion. But I heard whispers, about a conflict with the music council, something about misallocated funds and how he tried to expose it." Lila's heart jumped. "He went after the council." Elise nodded. "And then, poof. Gone. When he came back, he was different. Brilliant, but colder. Like he had built a wall around himself with every note he didn't dare play." Lila clutched the edges of the piano bench she sat on. "So the music I played was likely written during that time," Elise said. "When he was gone. I remember the way he used to notate. Little sketches in the margins, stars, clocks, torn hearts. You said yours had those?" Lila nodded slowly. "Exactly those." Elise exhaled sharply, like someone confirming a suspicion they had feared for years. "Then it was him. But why would he be angry?" Lila asked. "Why storm out?" "Because you brought back something he buried," Elise said. "That piece wasn't just music. It was a scream. A confession. A diary written without words. And you just played it in front of 1,000 people." The room fell into silence. Lila's thoughts raced. She remembered the old man at the bookstore, the way he had insisted she take the leather-bound book without paying. "No charge," he'd said. "But read it slowly." Had he known? "Where is he now?" Lila asked. "He has a private rehearsal studio down the west wing. But be careful. You just cracked something open that's been sealed shut a long time." Without another word, Lila stood and left the lounge. The corridor stretched long and empty ahead of her. Her footsteps echoed on the tile floor. She passed posters of conservatory alumni, rows of golden plaques, and finally reached the final door. A single light bulb flickered overhead. She knocked gently. Nothing. She tried again, louder. Then the door opened. Inside, the room was dim, save for a single standing lamp casting golden light over a worn baby grand piano. Voss sat there, his back to the door, his hands hovering over the keys. He didn't look up. I shouldn't have left, Lila said softly. He didn't move. You didn't play it wrong, he murmured after a long pause. You played it too right. His voice was hoarse. Like someone who hadn't spoken that much in years. He stared at the piano as if afraid it might shatter if touched. I didn't know it was yours, Lila said. I found it in a bookshop. I buried that piece, he whispered. I buried it along with a part of myself I swore never to resurrect. Lila stepped closer. Why? He slowly turned his face toward her. The sharpness from before, the one that had cut through her confidence on stage, was gone. In its place was something fractured. Because that version of me, he said, wasn't built to survive. He stood and walked to a narrow shelf by the wall. From it, he pulled out a battered, leather notebook. Pages peeked out from the edges, some folded, others torn. I wrote everything in here, he said. The music. The truth. The part they tried to erase. He handed it to her. It was warm from his hands. You played my most painful memory, he whispered, and somehow made it feel like healing. Lila opened the first page, heart pounding. The handwriting inside was sharp, frantic, slanted. Some pages were blotched. Others bled ink as though written in the dark, by a man losing track of time. She read the first line aloud. Day 3. The walls sweat when it rains. The man in the cell next to me talks to ghosts. Voss looked down, ashamed. They said I was unstable, he said. But I was angry. Furious. I'd uncovered how the Music Council diverted grants from deserving students to donors' children. I thought if I exposed them, people would listen. And instead, they buried me, he said bitterly. No trial. No press. Just silence. Lila felt her throat tighten. The piece I played, she said slowly, I called it Solitary Light. A long pause. Voss blinked hard. That's what I used to call the moonlight that came through the window of my cell. Lila clutched the notebook to her chest. Then it wasn't just your story anymore. It's ours now. He smiled faintly. Maybe. They sat in silence as a clock ticked softly in the distance. Then Voss said something she hadn't expected. They'll try to stop you, you know. I know, she replied. He looked at her with something that almost resembled pride. Then let's give them something worth stopping. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time Lila left Voss's rehearsal studio, the notebook clutched tightly in her hands. The building seemed quieter now, subdued. As if even the walls had overheard their conversation and were processing what it meant. Her footsteps echoed through the marble corridors as she moved toward the adjudicator's lounge, the place where it all began just hours ago. She wasn't sure what compelled her to return there. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe she just needed answers. But as she passed the frosted glass doors leading into the room, her steps slowed. Voices. She stopped. Can't let it go public. Do you realize what that piece implies? It was a man's voice. Smooth. Cold. Familiar. A second voice answered, tense. She's just a student. She doesn't even know what she played. She knows, the first voice replied, clipped. She knows enough. If she opens her mouth, we shut this down, quietly. Burn the footage if we have to. Lila's heart pounded. They were talking about her. About him. She inched closer to the door, careful not to let her shoes scuff against the tile. The air felt heavier, like it carried electricity. I told you we never should have let Voss return, the voice hissed. Now that girl's lit a fire we can't control. A beat of silence followed. Then came the soft shuffle of papers. If the press gets wind of this, we're done. She played a piece composed in a federal holding facility, by a man discredited and erased. That's not a competition performance, it's a scandal. Lila's stomach turned. She stepped back, trembling. The words cut sharper than anything Voss had said earlier. They hadn't just tried to silence him. They were still doing it, systematically, carefully. And now she was in their sights too. She clutched the journal tighter and walked away, fast and quiet, breath catching in her throat. Once she was far enough, she ducked into a side stairwell and sank down on the steps. Her hands were shaking. She had proof now, his journal, her memory, the performance footage. And she had just heard the very people in charge conspiring to destroy it all. But she also had something they didn't. Conviction. The next morning, a press release was quietly circulated by the conservatory's media office. It announced a joint press conference to celebrate a remarkable student performance and the rediscovery of a previously uncredited classical composition. No mention of Voss. No mention of the journal. No mention of prison. They were already rewriting the story. Lila held the printed release in her hands as she sat in Elise Marlowe's office later that day. Elise scanned the document, then looked up at her, jaw tight. This is them trying to control the narrative. I'm not doing it, Lila said. Not like that. They'll say you're fabricating it. That the journal's a forgery. That you're mentally influenced by a man they labeled unstable. Then I speak first, Lila said. Elise raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean I'm going to tell the truth. All of it. At the press conference. With Voss beside me. You think he'll do it? I know he will, Lila said. Because I will. The room fell into silence. Elise finally smiled. You've got steel in you, kid. Just like he used to. That evening, Lila found Voss back in his studio, the piano open, a new sheet of music stretched across the stand. She recognized pieces of the score. It was solitary light, but something was different. Fuller. Bolder. He looked up. You came back. They're holding a press conference. Tomorrow. He nodded. I saw the memo. They're going to erase everything that matters. Turn it into a feel-good story about a talented student who found a mysterious gem. He exhaled slowly. Of course they are. She stepped forward and placed the journal on the piano lid. Then we tell the truth. Together. You and me. Before they do. His eyes narrowed slightly, then softened. I haven't spoken publicly in years. I know, she said. But maybe your silence has said enough. He considered that for a long time. Then, quietly, he nodded. The next day, the conservatory's central atrium was transformed. A sleek podium. Rows of chairs. Cameras from every major classical music publication. The sun filtered down through the arched skylight like a stage light from heaven itself. Lila waited off stage, the journal in her hand, her palms damp with nerves. In the crowd, she saw donors, teachers, students, all watching, waiting, oblivious to what was coming. Then she heard his voice. Karl Voss. Already at the podium. I was asked to speak today about a student's extraordinary performance, he began, voice calm, measured. But I must first speak about something else. Something buried. He paused, letting the silence settle like ash. Years ago, I disappeared. You were told I was ill. Exhausted. In truth, I was imprisoned, for exposing fraud and corruption within the Music Council. I was silenced. Erased. And while I sat in that cell, I wrote. Gasps rippled through the room. And what I wrote was never meant to be performed. But somehow, miraculously, it found its way into the hands of a girl who understood it better than anyone. He looked to the side, extending a hand. Lila Monroe. Lila stepped forward, each footfall heavy with weight. She joined him at the podium, holding up the journal. I found this, she said, voice steady. In a second-hand bookstore. I didn't know what it was. I only knew that it moved me. She opened to a page, one with notes, sketches, and a line scrawled in the margin, "No one hears the man in the dark. They only remember his silence." That piece, Solitary Light, wasn't anonymous. It was a confession. Written by a man the world was told to forget. She looked to the crowd. "I won't let you forget him." The room was utterly still. Then came a slow, powerful wave of applause. Not for the performance, but for the truth. The applause faded slowly, but the echo of what had just been said lingered like a storm cloud refusing to pass. Lila stepped back from the podium, heart pounding. She wasn't sure what she expected: shock, outrage, tears. But what she saw instead were eyes. Dozens of them. Watching. Not dismissing her like they had before, not brushing her off as a naive girl with a dramatic story, but really watching. Some looked rattled. Others whispered to each other, their pens now scribbling furiously across notebooks and tablets. A few remained stone-faced, particularly those seated in the first row, dressed in tailored suits and pearl earrings, the kind of people who signed checks and made rules and never expected anyone to speak without permission. Carl Voss hadn't moved. His hands rested on the edges of the podium like anchors, his gaze fixed on the crowd as if daring anyone to speak. And then someone did. "Is there proof?" a reporter from a classical music magazine asked. "Of the corruption? Of the council's involvement?" Lila stepped forward again. "I have Maestro Voss's journal," she said, holding it up. "It contains detailed entries, including names, dates, and figures tied to grant reallocation and student disqualifications. Some of those grants were reawarded to children of donors. Some students disappeared entirely from the records." "And where is this journal now?" another voice asked, more skeptical. "In my hands," Lila said. "And backed up in 3 places. It's already been scanned and timestamped." A murmur swept through the room. Someone else stood, an older woman with cropped silver hair and cold, precise eyes. One of the conservatory board members. Lila recognized her immediately. "Miss Monroe," she said coolly, "you understand the gravity of what you're suggesting. These are serious allegations." "I understand exactly what I'm saying," Lila replied. "And I understand what happens when truth makes powerful people uncomfortable." The woman's expression didn't waver, but her hands tightened around the program in her lap. Carl Voss finally spoke again. "For years, I thought silence would protect me. That by stepping back, I could still preserve my legacy without being devoured by politics. But I was wrong. The only thing silence protects is power." More applause. This time louder, sharper. Voss looked to Lila, then back at the crowd. "I don't want revenge. I want restoration. Credit the piece. Acknowledge the truth. Let the music speak without lies." A single question punctured the tension. "What do you call the piece now?" a young journalist asked, raising his voice slightly over the noise. Lila answered without hesitation. "Solitary Light." The name settled over the room like a benediction. The press conference was over, but the story was only beginning. News cameras turned toward the exit. Reporters rushed toward Lila and Voss, firing questions. Elise Marlowe intercepted many, acting as a buffer, shielding them just long enough for the two to slip away through a side hallway. They didn't speak until they reached a back stairwell. Once there, Voss slumped onto the steps, resting his elbows on his knees. "Well," he muttered. "I guess we lit the match." Lila sat beside him, breath still short. "And we're going to let it burn." The following hours were a blur. Clips of the press conference hit social media. The full video was uploaded within minutes. Within a day, it had crossed 1 million views. Comments poured in. "This is the most honest thing I've seen in classical music in decades. How could they silence someone like Voss? This girl is a warrior. The official conservatory account issued a sterile statement: "We are investigating the claims with full cooperation from Maestro Voss and Miss Monroe." But it was too late. The narrative had already escaped their control. And yet, the backlash came swiftly. That evening, Lila received an anonymous email: "You're playing with fire. You'll burn too." Another email from the scholarship committee informed her that her academic funding was under review pending behavioral conduct. She sat on her dorm bed, reading it over and over, then forwarded it to Voss. His reply came minutes later: "Expected. Don't flinch." She didn't. Instead, she marched down to the campus archive, an old stone building that smelled of dust and secrets. There, she spent hours combing through financial ledgers and grant disbursement logs. With Elisa's help, she dug through folders dating back nearly 15 years. She found what she was looking for. A scholarship labeled Piano Outreach Grant Number 674. It was awarded to a student named Elias Ferris. But the following year, that same scholarship number was attributed to someone else, a donor's daughter. The original recipient's file was gone. Vanished. But not forgotten. That night, Lila posted her findings online, tagging several news outlets and advocacy groups. And the internet responded. A student from Boston commented that the same thing had happened to her brother. A violinist from New York shared similar grant inconsistencies. Soon, dozens of stories emerged, quiet patterns that matched what Voss had detailed in his journal. By the next morning, #SolitaryLight was trending worldwide. News anchors debated it. Music forums exploded with discussion. Former students began speaking up. The board panicked. A second press release was issued, stating that the conservatory would be conducting a full internal audit. But it wasn't enough. The truth was already louder than any statement they could fabricate. Lila received a call just after noon. A trembling voice. "This is Anna Ferris. Elias's sister. I saw the video. I have something you need to see." Lila's breath caught. Anna sent a scanned copy of an old email, addressed to Elias. It was from the council treasurer. The subject line: Scholarship Confirmation. The message clearly congratulated Elias on his award. And the date matched the exact day Lila had found in the ledger. Proof. Undeniable. Lila met Voss at his home that evening. He sat quietly at the piano as she showed him the email. "This," he whispered, "is what I was trying to prove all those years ago." She looked at him, eyes fierce. "Then let's make sure it doesn't get buried again." They scanned everything. Anna's email. The grant logs. Photos of the missing ledger entries. And they uploaded it all to a secure site called solitarylighttruth.org. The evidence was no longer in a file. It was a movement. By the time the sun rose over the conservatory, the world had already changed. The website Lila and Voss launched, solitarylighttruth.org, was exploding with traffic. Thousands of visitors scrolled through the digital pages, financial records, annotated scans, journal entries, and the proof from Anna Ferris. Each document carefully labeled. Each line a piece of a puzzle the elite had long hoped would stay broken. Comments flooded in. Former students. Anonymous faculty. Parents who had watched their children get mysteriously dropped from programs or passed over for scholarships without explanation. And among the hundreds of stories, one thing became clear. This wasn't about a single girl playing a forbidden piece. It was about a system that had preyed on silence for years. Lila sat in Voss's kitchen, the leather journal resting beside a mug of untouched tea. He stood at the sink, staring blankly out the window as a breeze rustled the leaves. "They're coming for us," he finally said. "I know. They're going to make it personal. Twist the facts. Smear your name. Maybe even mine." "I know," she said again, softer. But they can't change the truth anymore. It's out. Voss turned, his eyes clearer than they'd been in days. You're not afraid. I'm exhausted, she said. But not afraid. A knock came at the door. They both froze. Voss moved first, peeking through the side window. Then he relaxed. Elise. She stepped in quickly, laptop in hand. You two better sit down, she said. They did. She opened her computer and turned it toward them. CNN wants a segment. NPR too. A university in Berlin just requested to premiere Solitary Light, as a full orchestral arrangement. Lila blinked. That's incredible. Elise finished. Yes. But that's not all. She clicked another tab. An internal memo had leaked from the conservatory board, revealing plans to quietly expel Lila on the grounds of unauthorized media dissemination and misconduct. It was dated 2 days prior. They wrote this before the press conference, Voss said, his voice low. They planned to silence you before you even spoke, Elise added. Lila sat back, exhaling hard. Of course they did. What do we do? Elise asked. Lila didn't hesitate. We show up. Tonight. At the gala. Voss frowned. The board's fundraising gala. Yes, she said. We take the stage. We perform. Not to entertain, but to testify. Do you know what they'll do if we do that? Elise asked. They'll do it anyway, Lila replied. Whether we're silent or loud. So we might as well be loud. Voss sat forward, his voice calm but edged with steel. Then we play. But not Solitary Light. She looked at him. I've been working on something else, he said. Something unfinished. He pulled out several pages of handwritten sheet music. Arcs of melody. Bold notations. It looked raw. Furious. Hopeful. What is it? She asked. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. The fourth movement. That night, the conservatory gala gleamed with glass and gold. A string quartet welcomed donors into the grand ballroom. Waiters in tuxedos passed trays of sparkling wine. Everything looked perfect, except for the tension hanging in the air like static. Whispers swirled as Lila and Voss entered, side by side. Some gasped. Others pointed. A few scurried to alert board members. But it didn't matter. Because as the lights dimmed and the MC stepped on stage, Karl Voss walked past him, uninvited, and stood before the crowd. He didn't ask for a mic. He didn't need one. I've come tonight not to play for you, he said, his voice echoing through the hushed chamber, but to remind you who you tried to silence. Gasps rippled. Lila stepped forward, placing a thick folder atop the piano, every record, every email, every proof. This is what your silence buried, she said. But we are not afraid of light. The room erupted in shouts. Some donors stood to leave. One board member called for security. But the guards didn't move. They watched. Then Voss sat at the piano. Lila joined him. The room froze. And they began. The fourth movement soared, an anthem for the unheard. Bold, fiery, unrelenting. It carried echoes of Solitary Light, but lifted them into new air. It didn't mourn. It roared. Some in the audience wept. Others simply sat, breathless. And when the final note crashed like thunder into silence, no one moved. Then one person stood. And clapped. Then another. And another. Until the entire ballroom stood, not in ovation, but in witness. When they bowed, Lila could feel the shift in the room. Something had broken. And something new had begun. The aftermath of the gala rippled through the classical music world like a dropped stone in still water. Overnight, the performance of the fourth movement, recorded on smartphones and quickly uploaded to every major platform, went viral. Music critics who had once dismissed Carl Voss as an echo of former brilliance, now called the duet with Lila Monroe the most vital piece of protest music in a generation. A conductor in Paris called it an audible uprising. A prominent cultural journal ran the headline. A teenage pianist and a disgraced maestro just woke the world. But not everyone was celebrating. The conservatory board held an emergency session behind closed doors. Rumors swirled. Some said Voss's former students were being contacted, others said donor files had gone missing. Anonymous sources whispered that a former treasurer had quietly left the country. Lila was summoned to a formal disciplinary hearing. A thinly veiled attempt at intimidation. She arrived alone. The panel of 7 sat behind a curved desk in the conservatory's smallest courtroom. It was a quiet, windowless room, designed not for justice, but control. Still, she stood straight-backed, the same leather-bound journal cradled in her arms. "Miss Monroe," the chairwoman began, "you're being reviewed for insubordination, misuse of institutional resources, and public defamation of conservatory staff." Lila said nothing. Another member, a man with a clipped beard and narrow eyes, added, "You've put this institution at risk. Your actions have triggered financial withdrawal from 2 major donors." Lila's reply was simple. "Then you shouldn't have lied." Gasps whispered across the bench. "You've offered no verified proof." "The journal was authenticated by a handwriting analyst 2 days ago," she interrupted. "The email from Anna Ferris has now been independently confirmed. 3 other students have come forward with nearly identical scholarship fraud." She set a folder on their desk. "And here are 30 more. With signatures. With numbers." The panel fell silent. Then the woman with the silver eyes leaned in. "Miss Monroe, why do you care so much?" Lila looked at her. "Because I remember what it feels like to think your voice doesn't matter. And I won't let you do that to anyone else again." Outside the hearing room, a group of students had gathered. They applauded when she emerged. She didn't smile. She just nodded and walked away. Later that night, she found Voss in the conservatory garden. He was seated beneath the same magnolia tree as before, journal in hand. A crowd of white petals lay scattered around him like snow. "They'll try to survive this," he said. "They won't," Lila replied. "The truth's already louder than them." He looked at her, then slowly held out a flash drive. "What's this?" "The 5th movement," he said. "Still unfinished." Lila stared at it, heart racing. "You're still writing?" He smiled. "You gave me back the part of me that stopped." She took it carefully, holding it like a sacred object. "Will you finish it with me?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "But not just us." She had an idea. Not another gala. Not another private hall filled with judges and donors. But a concert. Public. Free. Outdoors. A celebration of silenced music. Within hours, a call went out online. The Solitary Light Project was born. Within days, young musicians from around the world reached out. Violinists from El Paso. Cellists from Nairobi. A blind pianist from Tokyo. Each with their own story of being overlooked, denied, erased. They came to play. Not for fame. But for remembrance. The night of the concert arrived with a sky full of stars and a park full of people. There was no velvet rope. No corporate banners. No seating chart. Just a wide-open lawn in the heart of the city, lit by string lights and surrounded by makeshift stages, one for every student who had once been told they didn't belong. It was the most unconventional performance the city had ever seen. Teenagers played cello beside retirees. A young woman with Down syndrome played a clarinet solo that brought the crowd to tears. A boy in a wheelchair tapped out rhythms on a hand drum, laughing as people clapped along. And there, in the center of it all, stood Lila and Karl Voss. They said nothing at first. Instead, they simply sat down at the piano placed on the central stage, brought in by volunteers, tuned by a mechanic who once fixed instruments for underfunded schools. As the crowd hushed, Lila reached into her pocket and pulled out the flash drive Voss had given her. The fifth movement. Still unfinished. Still raw. Still full of everything they hadn't yet said. But that was the point. They had decided not to finalize the ending. It would be improvised, shaped in real time by every musician who had joined the project. A living symphony of forgotten voices. Lila played the opening, soft and fractured, like memory trying to find itself. Then Voss joined her, threading his melody through hers, careful, slow. Other musicians followed, on flute, violin, harp, trumpet, accordion, and voices that didn't even need words. It built like a storm and glowed like dawn. And when the final note arrived, no one could tell who had written it, because everyone had. Silence fell. Then thunderous applause. But this time, Lila didn't bow. She stood. Stepped to the microphone. And raised the journal high. "This story doesn't end with a standing ovation," she said. "It ends when every kid who's ever been told their dream didn't matter gets to play it anyway." The crowd roared. But she wasn't done. "To the institutions that lied, your silence is broken. To the ones who think power gives them the right to erase people, they're listening now. And to anyone out there who thinks their voice is too small, play anyway." Voss joined her at the mic, his voice quiet but unshakable. "They tried to end my story. But she gave it a new beginning. And now, it belongs to all of you." In the weeks that followed, the fallout intensified. 5 board members resigned. A federal investigation into conservatory fraud launched. 2 former council members were indicted for financial misconduct. And Lila? She declined all interviews. Instead, she and Voss took the Solitary Light Project global. They launched a fellowship program. A traveling concert series. A publishing platform for anonymous composers who feared retribution. They never asked for applause again. They asked for action. And people answered. In classrooms and basements. In community centers and online forums. Music began to rise from places it had once been buried. Not perfect. But pure. Some called it a revolution. Others called it healing. But Voss, in a quiet interview months later, called it something else. Justice, he said. Played in the key of memory. And Lila? She just kept playing. At True Echo, we believe the most powerful stories don't always begin with power, but with truth. Lila Monroe's journey wasn't just about music. It was about choosing to speak when silence would have been safer. It was about one girl who found a forgotten melody and used it to unbury a man's stolen legacy, and inspire a global movement. As Maestro Karl Voss once wrote from his prison cell, "No one hears the man in the dark. They only remember his silence." But because of Lila, silence didn't win. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power you hold to change even one corner of the world, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to True Echo for more powerful stories that demand to be heard. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And remember, truth has a sound. Let it play.